The title of the book is End of Discussion: How the Left's Outrage Industry Shuts Down Debate, Manipulates Voters, and Makes America Less Free and Fun. Where'd you all even come up with the title?
Well, we were trying to figure out, for the end of discussion part, something that was catchy and quick and intuitive. And we were bouncing ideas around, and finally Mary Catherine just blurted out, end of discussion. And we immediately said, yes, that's it, because it reminds you of your childhood where you're having an argument or a debate in your mind with your parent, and they want it to be over, so they pull rank on you, as a parent is allowed to, and said, no, you're gonna finish your dinner before you get ice cream, end of discussion. And then it's over, right? And so that's what the left, primarily, we argue in the book, is trying to do with so many of our cultural and political debates in this country. And we just thought that the end of discussion formulation was self-explanatory and would at least bring people back to a certain point in their mind and understand where we're coming from. Many Americans, not just conservatives, I think, and we're seeing more liberals writing about this and talking about this recently, there is an increasing cultural trend in the United States where, rather than having robust, freewheeling, substantive debates on issues, we are trying to disqualify each other and to demonize, and rather than trying to win debates on the merits, people are trying to prevent debates from even happening in the first place. And this applies, of course, in our politics, but it's applying more and more on college campuses and just in everyday American life. And I think average people, ordinary people, have felt this impulse where, gosh, should I really say that at the office or at the cocktail party or dinner party I'm at, or wherever they happen to be, on Facebook or on Twitter, because there's this growing concern that you're going to get labeled a bad person and you might even lose your job. This is not a healthy environment in a country that is ostensibly and founded on free expression.
Absolutely, and you talk about this throughout the book. One chapter in particular drew my eye, and that's the one on race baiting. And you talk about the dog whistle. And according to the book, it says, the way the left tells it, conservatives are currently and constantly slipping secret codes into their rhetoric as a means of conveying ugly, race-based messages about a person or subject without coming out and articulating it explicitly. This is a pretty big claim to make on the left. Do Republicans and conservatives make it too easy for the left to make those claims?
Look, I think that there are definitely instances where people on both sides say things that have racial overtones or are explicitly racist. We don't argue in the book that racism is gone in this country and it's over. What we're saying is that the left in particular, in its defense of this president specifically, vastly, vastly abuses the R word and cries racism far too often, and they find it, supposedly, in the most preposterous of words and phrases, and we go through some of them in the book where, MSNBC is convinced that talking about President Obama golfing, the word golf is a dog whistle. Saying that he's from Chicago is a dog whistle. And the list sort of goes on, and it becomes absurd. The goal there is not to actually say, hey, let's talk about the president's policies, let's talk about the roots of this opposition on substance. Let's just say even the words they're using to describe the president is racist. And once you've described something or labeled something racist, that's basically the end of the discussion. It is, you are designating that person and that argument as illegitimate and off to the side.
And that sort of leads into another chapter, voter ID. You talk about that, and you talk about how there are some in the Republican Party who feel as though Republicans should abandon voter ID laws because it may seem insensitive to certain groups. How would you explain voter ID laws to those groups who claim that this is a political ploy to prevent minorities from voting in large numbers?
Sure. Well, the first thing I would do is point out that not only is voter ID supported by about 3/4 of the country, according to numerous polls that we detail in End of Discussion, in those polls, a majority of non-white voters also support voter ID. So the people who strongly oppose voter ID laws are a very loud, very small minority. On the substance of the question, we get into a number of examples of how, and we talk about the law in Georgia, for instance. These laws, I should mention, have been upheld by the Supreme Court. There's a 6-3 decision that was authored by a very liberal justice in the early 2000s, I believe. There's a law in Georgia that was fought tooth and nail by the left in that state. It survived all the court challenges. The law is in place and has been since 2007, if I recall correctly. And minority turnout increased as a share of the electorate in both 2008, which might be explained by Barack Obama being on the ticket, but also in 2010, a midterm election. So the sort of the fear-mongering about suppression and suppressing minority turnout has not been borne out by the actual facts, by what has actually happened. And the other,
and it's just an ID requirement.
That's
vote.
it. Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah, you show up, you show your ID to prove that you are who you say you are, and you cast a ballot. Sanctity of the ballot, it is a common sense, bare bones safeguard for our electoral system, and it's so commonsensical that it's, I think, intuitively supported, as the polling indicates, by 75, 76, one poll, 83% of the American people.
So then what do Republicans do to combat that, the left's message that this is racist and you're doing the same thing that happened during the civil rights era, you're suppressing voters?
Well, we'd say, A, we're not suppressing voters. B, if there are people who lack voter IDs, who lack ID, let's get them IDs, right? The left seems to believe that the government can do practically anything. Let's give the government control of our healthcare system. The government is all powerful. Oh, but making sure its citizens have photo identification so they can vote legally, well, that's a bridge too far. We can't do that. That's suppression. That doesn't make logical sense. And then the other point Republicans should bring up is the one that I did. How is this a racist voter suppression, scheme if large majorities of black and Hispanic voters support it? Make them answer that question, because they can't.
All right. Another issue you talk about, and you all don't shy away from any hot topics in this book, which made it such a fun read for me.
Well, but that's the point.
Yeah.
Shying away from hot topics is what the left wants us to do. They want us to be quiet. They want us to couch everything we say and really, look, we're not pro-rudeness. We don't want to be out there insulting people, and we talk about it in the book. This should not come across as some license to offend. Mm-hmm. What we do want to make sure is that we are not having important debates stifled and stymied and censored, even at the margins, because of these cynical tactics that we're seeing and trying to call out in end of discussion.
You also address same-sex marriage in this book, which, as of late, especially with the Supreme Court, has really been at the forefront of thinking for many Americans. You all outline several points in your beliefs in terms of same-sex marriage. I want to read briefly here. You mentioned that we respect the fact that the vast majority of traditional marriage supporters are not mean-spirited bigots, and we don't pretend that society should blindly rush to reimagine a definitional, millennial-old institution without some significant measure of trepidation, reflection, and debate. Why is it important to have honest reflection, trepidation, and debate when it comes to same-sex marriage?
Well, what we're saying in that particular passage that you read is because we're for gay marriage, Mary Catherine and I in the book. And I disclose in the book that I'm gay, so readers have that at their disposal if they want to make judgments based on that in terms of where I'm coming from on the issue. But we think it's important to acknowledge that the overwhelming majority of Americans who disagree with us on gay marriage, who are in favor of keeping and maintaining the traditional definition of marriage, do not hold this position because they're nasty, mean-spirited, bigoted, homophobic people. Those people absolutely exist. I've run into some of them on both sides of the spectrum, actually, both ends. But I don't want to sit here and pretend like homophobia and bigotry doesn't exist, but it's really a small fraction. Most people hold this belief for religious reasons, for ethical reasons, and we don't think it is helpful to our debate nationally on same-sex marriage to try to impugn people's motives. That's a recurring theme in end of discussion. Too much impugning of motives and imputing of bad motives to the other side. So, for example, in California, Proposition 8, which was the amendment to define marriage as one man and one woman in 2008, it passed in a very blue state back when Barack Obama was pretending to be against gay marriage. The opposition to Proposition 8, their whole catchphrase was "No hate," with H and then the number 8, which was snappy, and I understand why they went with it. But implicit in that message is that people who backed Proposition 8 were doing so out of hatred.
Right.
And I don't think that that's fair. I don't think it is accurate. I don't think it's a good way to help persuade people who might be persuadable on the question to say, oh, you disagree with us? That's because you're hateful. It might be an effective demagogic effort, but I don't think it's fair, and it's not the way these debates ought to be adjudicated.